So I'm going to be talking about the UK now. And the UK is kind of similar in nature to Spain, in the sense that it hasn't been taking as many refugees as other European countries like Italy. So the next slide, the last slide on the PowerPoint is just a slide of kind of Europe as a whole, but you can kind of see the UK is in the far upper left, and there's an arrow kind of showing where the English Channel is. So the UK not only is even farther away from the Mediterranean, it's actually a separate island. It's separate from Europe as a whole. So not only do they have to, refugees, particularly coming from Africa or Syria or the Middle East, not only do they have to cross the Mediterranean and get across Europe, they also have to get across the English Channel, which is the body of water between France and the UK, to get to the UK. So in part, the UK has been taking less refugees because purely based on geography, it's harder for them to get there. Also policies. The UK hasn't been as welcoming to refugees as well. The UK is a part of the EU, which is the European Union, which is an organization. It's a political, social, and economic entity in Europe. There's about 28 countries in it. And they've been passing laws. They have human rights ordinances. So a lot of countries have been taking in refugees. But the UK has always kind of been separate from that. They haven't taken the euro, which is their currency, among other things. So they've kind of stayed outside of that, and they haven't been as welcoming. Even so, they did pledge to take over 20,000 refugees by 2020, but they've been criticized a lot by different organizations, human rights organizations, global organizations, even their own certain members of parliament. Parliament is their system of government in the UK. And they've been criticized and said that the government's not currently doing enough to meet this commitment. They've taken less than 2,000 refugees, and they haven't really been actively trying to reach their goal of 20,000. Including, they also have a lot of asylum applications. So even before the refugee crisis, particularly from countries like Syria, became really prominent, they've been dealing with asylum applications, and they haven't really been processing them as quickly or as efficiently as they should be. So currently there are a lot of people waiting for decisions from asylum committees to grant them asylum. So right now they're stuck in this weird kind of limbo state because they're technically on UK soil, but because they haven't been granted asylum, they can't legally work, they can't make money, they're stuck, they can't really start to rebuild their lives and integrate into society. So they honestly don't know if they're going to be able to stay there, if they're going to be able to become British citizens. Currently, unfortunately, there are over 34,000 applications that are still waiting for a decision whether or not they will be granted asylum. So that's really unfortunate for people that are trying to get asylum and for refugees that want to come to the UK. So kind of in contrast to Spain, the public sentiment towards refugees is not as positive. There are a lot of people that do want to take in refugees. So I don't want to kind of generalize it, but there was a very real example of the kind of fear and hatred and stigma towards refugees and immigrants during an event this past year called Brexit. We won't have you on mute, but if anyone knows what Brexit is, raise your hand. Hopefully some of you have heard it before. So Brexit is abbreviation for British exit, which refers to the event on June 23rd, 2016. So it happened over the summer. There was a referendum where British citizens voted to leave the European Union. So I talked a little bit about before what the European Union is. It's a unique economic and political union between the majority of European states. It was formed after the Second World War to kind of foster economic cooperation, the idea that countries that they can trade together. It's also easier you don't have to have a visa, you don't have to have kind of approval to go to a different country to work. If you have a European Union passport, you can go anywhere and work anywhere. But Britain has always kind of been separate. They haven't taken the euro. So there was actually a vote this past summer to leave the European Union. So during that time, there was kind of the pro leaving the EU and then against it. And so a lot of people that wanted to leave the EU, they started kind of using rhetoric of, oh, we don't want immigrants coming in, they're taking our jobs. Oh, refugees are dangerous, we don't want them coming in. And the EU is forcing us to take them. So and this wasn't by any means the general consensus, not what everyone believed, but in the media, in the news, on social media, there was a lot of hate speech that happened. There were a lot of kind of racist incidents, people kind of calling out and criticizing refugees, saying that they're going to hurt the economy, hurt kind of the social sphere as well. But in reality, it's an interesting, a lot of studies have found that immigrants are younger and significantly more educated than people born inside the UK. And most studies have shown that migration is a boost to the British economy than a drain on it. So unfortunately, the public anger that was created towards immigration and refugees was kind of a bigger, it was kind of used as a way to explain their anger for housing issues, unemployment issues. A lot of people in the UK feel a sense of alienation. They are losing their identity because there's so many diverse cultures now in the UK, which is great. But the anti-EU group was able to kind of foster and create this hatred and uncertainty and fear of refugees and immigrants. That's unfortunate. It's been happening a lot in countries all over the world. It's evident in the US as well. The idea that, refugees might be terrorists, which is definitely not true at all. So because of that, the refugee crisis is an incredibly emotional issue in the UK, in Europe, throughout the world. So particularly how will the refugee crisis influence the UK, influence Brexit? So some people have argued that the refugee crisis threatens the stability of the entire European Union because there's this large migration of people coming to the continent. But there's a lot of studies that have argued that actually it's beneficial because the European population is aging, so actually help them out. But specifically in the UK, people worry that because the UK has kind of passed this law or has decided not to be a part of the EU, they're kind of breaking away from the human rights ordinances and they're kind of deciding to take in refugees. So one, people are worried that other countries, seeing how the general public voted to leave the EU, they might be worried about trying to advocate and take more refugees in. So that might be a negative effect in Europe. There's also a worry that the UK will stop taking as many refugees because they are definitely shifting to a more conservative focus, more kind of focus on like Britain instead of Europe and the world as a whole. So they really, and unfortunately, they created this negative picture and this negative stigma around immigrants, around refugees in the UK. And it doesn't, not everyone believes it, it doesn't affect everyone, but there are potential concerns for the future of how it will influence it. So that's just kind of a brief snapshot of how the UK is feeling about refugees and how it's influenced their government and policies, as well as how it might affect in the future Europe as a whole. So I think we're kind of getting towards the end of our time, but we just wanted to kind of go through, we're going to wrap it up a little bit. If you guys have any questions for us, please feel free to write them up. You can send us an email or we can answer them next time we do a session. But really quickly, like how does the refugee crisis and the issues in Europe affect us in the US? So because Italy and Spain and the UK are so close to Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, the refugee crisis has been a big issue in the past few years. It's been debated a lot, in part because there are already refugees in Europe. There are already refugees just moving constantly. We saw pictures of the boats. So they need to really work to help these refugees. In the UK or in the US, because we're separated by an ocean, it's a little harder for them to take their little boats and get here. So, but we've been trying to accept them. So the US is dealing with the refugee crisis. Canada's been taking in a lot of refugees. The US has been taking refugees, particularly in Carborough, which is a town next to Chapel Hill. We've, since 2009, over 400 Burmese refugees, so people from Burma, have come to the US. So already we're taking in some Syrian refugees, but it's really important, especially right now during the presidential election, presidential debate. The presidential candidates are looking at and talking about the refugee crisis and immigration. So it's really important to listen to what they're saying, what people are talking about, because for instance, Hillary Clinton proposed to take as many as 65,000 refugees, because currently, particularly in Syria, there are over 4 million people that have been displaced by the Syrian crisis. So there's a lot of people that need our help. So it's really interesting and really important to listen to what people are saying, what our politicians are saying, what human rights and global organizations are saying, because this issue isn't going to go away. So Europe is dealing with it right now, and the US is also dealing with it. So it's really important to kind of figure out what you think about it, research more, people all over the world that are refugees and need our help and looking for asylum. I don't know.